Si conclude qui il panel sull'Internal Compliance Programs e passiamo rapidamente, perché il tempo, ahimè, ci è tiranno, all'ultimo panel della giornata su un tema che è, a mio avviso, di estremo interesse in questo momento ed è stato di grandissima attualità. È il tema del controllo sugli investimenti, che è contiguo e sovrapposto anche al tema di cui abbiamo parlato oggi, cioè sanzioni economiche internazionali e trasferimento internazionale di tecnologia, perché in realtà attraverso il controllo sugli investimenti gli stati stanno e vogliono controllare proprio quello che non è facilmente controllabile, cioè il trasferimento di tecnologia, e vogliono preservare i propri attivi fondamentali e strategici. Il nostro panel oggi è tutto composto di colleghi di Attica e cominceremo negli Stati Uniti e poi verremo in Europa, vedremo il quadro normativo europeo e poi lo caroteremo in alcuni paesi membri. Rapidissimamente subito la parola alla grandissima amica nostra di sempre, Kay Georgi, che ci parlerà dell'inquadramento americano in materia di controllo degli investimenti.
Ok, buonasera a tutti. Grazie Avvocato Padovan per l'invito, grazie a tutti quelli degli avvocati dello studio Legale Padovan per tutto l'aiuto per questa conferenza. Sono molto fiera di essere qua. Ma parlo in inglese perché sbaglio subito quando parlo in italiano di queste cose. So I'm going to give you a very short summary of how the investment review process works in the United States. And the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you a question. Our review process, our investment review process in the United States has been around for 44 years. And in fact, President Ford in 1975 created this by executive order. And many of you weren't even born in 1975. I know I look out there and I see some of you weren't born. So 44 years.
I was born.
Well, I was born too. I wasn't that big, but I was born. So in those 44 years, how many times do you think an American president has actually blocked or undone an investment transaction? Do you think, and I'm going to do a show of hands so no one has to get up and stand, right? Show of hands, how many of you thinks it's like on my two hands, single digits? How many think it's like double digits? How many think it's triple digits? So 1 to 9, who thinks is 1 to 9? There's one over there too. A few people say. How many thinks it's double digits? And how many thinks it's triple? Okay, well, there were some right answers in there. Surprisingly, only 5 times. So it hasn't happened that much. President Bush, the first President Bush, did it once. President Obama did it twice. And I actually need my little clicker thing because, sorry about that. And President Trump has done it 3 times. So here's just some of the headlines. And these are the more recent ones. The U.S. blocked Alibaba, a Chinese company, from putting in a bid for buying MoneyGram. Concerns were about the information, the personal information that MoneyGram would have about transactions, and that personal information going to the Chinese. Another one recently in the news, the Trump administration forced a health startup company called Patients Like Me not to take on a Chinese investment, which forced them into a situation where they had to find another investor. It was a startup, it was a small company. A couple years ago, President Trump blocked a China-backed acquisition of a semiconductor company called Lattice. President Obama blocked a Chinese wind farm. They were buying an Oregon wind farm, but it just happened to be a little too close to a sensitive naval base. And the US government was worried about what they were going to be seeing or looking over their shoulders. Another recent case, just involving this spring, the US pressured the Russia buyout firm, Pamplona, to sell its shares of a cybersecurity company, Cofense, which actually Cofense had a better name. It used to be called FishMe. I think that's a better name than Cofense. fish me. And then, interestingly enough, a company called Grindr, which has a dating app primarily used, I think, by gays and lesbians to find other people who are interested or interesting, was forced to relinquish controls over that company. And actually, that was another case. A couple of these cases were cases where the acquisition already took place, like this one, and they're forced to selling out their interests, which is what they're doing right now. So what is this law? We call it CFIUS, which sounds bad in English. It sounds a lot like syphilis. Sorry, that's a bad joke. So what is it? The CFIUS is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. The mission, obviously, is to screen foreign investments in U.S. business for national security purposes. That was the primary original idea. It's a full committee comprised of lots of different agencies, but it's headed by the Treasury Department, which is the same department that is also containing OFAC, so you can see it has a number of different hats. And usually when they do a review of a particular acquisition, Treasury does it with one of the other agencies. So the jurisdiction is originally, so this law changed a lot last summer. In August, Congress passed a law and the President Trump signed it that changed it. But before, the legacy, the old CFIUS, the jurisdiction were over mergers, acquisitions, or takeovers that would result in control over a U.S. business. So you actually had to take over the business and as a result actually be able to move it around, control it. So it was M&A, and the filings were voluntary. You didn't have to do the filing, but if you didn't do the filing and the U.S. government found out about it, there was always the threat that the president could undo it. So there were also U.S. government-initiated reviews as well. So we'll go over a little bit more what happened last summer, but the big expansion was to move it from not only controlling investments, but non-controlling investments. So you can buy less than a majority of a company, but if your investment is non-passive, it gives you some access to critical technology or critical infrastructure, then it's still subject to this CFIUS review. There's also real estate was put into CFIUS. You remember I mentioned President Obama stopped the Chinese wind farm from occupying the place next to the Navy. So they actually put the real estate in there. Then they wanted to also include transactions to evade CFIUS. So this hits minority position investments as well as control. And in addition, there's now mandatory CFIUS filing. So I don't know to the extent you guys actually are doing transactions in the United States, but some of them are now required filings. I think the majority reason for this presentation is to give a better idea of the EU investment, but I mention it just so you know. So the possible CFIUS outcomes, CFIUS can clear the transaction after reviewing it. They can clear it, but they require a mitigation agreement. And I would just say mitigation agreement can sometimes be pretty onerous, pretty hard. And then the President of the United States can block the transaction. Those are the nuclear options. Or the President of the United States can unwind the transaction after the fact. And I started out by saying only 5 have been blocked. That's a deceptive number because what happens in reality is you have a review, and at a certain point it becomes clear the CFIUS is not going to approve the thing, and the company decides, oh, this is not going to work, and they pull out. So that happened in one case we were handling last year. We put a lot of effort into establishing all of the products were not controlled products, and there was no reason to stop it. But at a certain point, CFIUS made it clear to the Chinese investor that this was not going to happen, and they pulled out. The other effect, of course, is they don't even start making the investment. In fact, I think there's been quite a dip in Chinese investment in the United States as a result, which could be not always a good thing. So why did they change the law last year? Quite quickly, there was a spike in CFIUS cases, in particular Chinese investment ones. They were more complex cases. They were complicated cases. And the Congress thought that the legacy authorities were outdated. They thought that there wasn't enough money being given to CFIUS to do the reviews, and the foreign governments, primarily China, they thought China was really trying to evade the old CFIUS by doing smaller investments and not doing big investments, so that they were trying to go around the holes. So this is the Senator John Cornyn. He is actually the lead author of the law, FIRMA, that was passed last year. And in our office, we have a very wonderful lawyer, Dave Hankey, who actually helped him write the law. So I am not the CFIUS expert in my firm. Dave Hankey is. So if I don't know an answer, I'm just telling you right now. That's because I'm not the expert. So moving ahead. Sorry. So President Trump, we can skip over President Trump. This was a very big deal. Whatever. Okay, so the whole idea is behind CFIUS is preserve U.S. technological advantage and to fill in those gaps. And one of those gaps was minority investments, real estate, and they were also really worried, and they didn't quite handle it, overseas joint ventures. They were concerned that the U.S. companies were doing overseas joint ventures and essentially giving away U.S. technology. In the end, the Congress actually solved that problem with a different way of handling it. They put to the Department of Commerce to come up with new and emerging technologies and foundational technologies, and to identify those technologies that should be subject to additional export controls. So it's sort of like the Full Jobs for American Lawyers Act, to make sure that we all have a lot of work as they look in different areas. So last November, they published a list of 14 gigantic areas, like artificial intelligence, where they're thinking about putting export controls, U.S. export controls. And we can only hope that they do them together with the European Commission and with the rest of the world, so it's not a unilateral U.S. export control, which will force U.S. companies to do all of their R&D overseas. So I think I should go very quickly now, right? Yep. Yeah, nodding, yes. So very quickly, the types of new investments that are covered under CFIUS are critical technologies, critical infrastructure, and personal sensitive data. And if you look back on the first slide, like 3 of those transactions that were stopped were actually personal sensitive data. Let's see. We've talked about this. Real estate, it was if it's part of an airport or seaport, or if it's close enough to U.S. military institution. Critical technologies is a useful thing to define. What it is export controlled information that's either on the U.S. munitions list. And I am touched that you're taking photos of all of my slides, and I would like to send you my slide deck. Okay, so happy to do that. So U.S. munitions lists are defense articles. The Commerce Control List, certain portions, and that's just the multilateral controls, regional security controls, RS controls, and surveillance technology. And then there you see emerging and foundational technologies. Those are the ones that the Department of Commerce is in the midst of defining. So one last quick couple of slides. Last fall, CFIUS put out what's called a pilot program on critical technology. And what they did is said, if you're making a non-controlling, non-passive investment in a U.S. business in critical technologies, you are required to file a CFIUS filing. So what is a critical technology, and it has to be in one of 27 industries, and it's where the target company either produces the product, designs, tests, manufactures, fabricates, or develops a critical technology. And in that case, you actually have to make the filing. So these are the pilot program industries. As you can see, these are pretty sensitive industries, such as aircraft, computers, semiconductors, guided missiles. So pretty significant things. So that's the end of my presentation. I just want to say one additional thing is, the CFIUS committee is now in the process of doing new regulations because the Congress wasn't able to fill in all the gaps. So when they passed the law, they left a few really important definitions undefined. So CFIUS right now is working on regulations, so there should be more exciting news in the future. But one of the things I just want to leave with is, this is another area where I see a lot of things converging between the U.S. and the EU in terms of law. I mean, human rights becoming such an important thing for export controls and economic sanctions. We have what we call the Magnitsky and global Magnitsky sanctions, and now I hear that you're doing the same thing in Europe. So there's really a convergence. So I think it's really important for forums like this to discuss it, and I really thank Marco for inviting me. Thanks.
Grazie mille Kay. Effettivamente c'è convergenza e convergenza da 1000 punti di vista, sia nella struttura della normativa, sia nei settori da proteggere, sia in quello che vogliamo, con una piccola differenza, che noi non abbiamo solo e non abbiamo esclusivamente un vantaggio competitivo tecnologico, ma abbiamo anche altre protezioni da inserire.